The sun rises over 16th century Istanbul, but it doesn't touch you. You're 18, the daughter of a wealthy merchant, and a prisoner in your own home. The latticed windows of your family's mansion glow with morning light, but to you they're prison bars made of gold. For 3 months you haven't set foot outside. The last time you glimpsed the city below was through a heavy silk veil, a brief, chaperoned visit to your aunt's house. Now your father sits with other men, discussing your marriage as if negotiating a trade shipment. The man you'll marry and his age, his habits, even his face, are unknown to you. And your opinion? It was never asked. In the Ottoman world, that silence is the law. For women of your class, life was built around a single commandment: be unseen. The richer your family, the thicker your walls became. Seclusion wasn't punishment, it was status. The less the world saw you, the more honor your family claimed. But this wasn't just tradition, it was policy. Ottoman society perfected the art of invisibility for women, turning half the population into shadows behind embroidered curtains. Diplomats visiting Istanbul wrote in disbelief. One, Ogier de Busbecq, described how Turkish men kept their wives so shut at home that they scarce saw the light of day. Imagine that, a lifetime without markets, friends, or the feel of sunlight on your face. Every door locked, every outing supervised, every interaction monitored. Marriage offered no escape. In fact, it deepened the prison. A husband could divorce his wife with a single phrase: "I repudiate you." No explanation required. Her property? Gone. Her home? Gone. Her voice? Erased. If she dared to seek divorce herself, she faced humiliation in court, forced to prove that her husband had failed in his duties, only to walk away penniless, from birth to death. A woman's world was defined by permission, her father's, her husband's, or her judge's. Freedom wasn't forbidden because it was dangerous. It was forbidden because it was unthinkable. If you thought widowhood might offer freedom, think again. In the Ottoman Empire, even death didn't release a woman from control. When a husband died, his widow couldn't simply remarry or move on. She had to stand before a panel of male judges and request permission to rebuild her life. The court demanded witnesses, sometimes neighbors, sometimes servants, to testify that she hadn't poisoned her spouse. Only after this public interrogation, this ritual humiliation, could she be allowed to remarry. The law presumed guilt until obedience was proven. Every woman was treated as a potential conspirator, a danger to male order. Marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a contract of possession. The husband's word carried the force of law. His home became her prison, and his honor determined her worth. Ottoman legal codes made this structure airtight. Men could divorce instantly. Women almost never could. And when they tried, they paid dearly, stripped of dowries, inheritances, and any claim to the life they'd built. A wife was expected to endure. Silence was her virtue. Submission was her safety. But the cruelty of the system went beyond the courts. It lived in the culture itself. To be a good woman meant to be invisible, voiceless, obedient. Families enforced it as fiercely as any sultan's decree. Mothers warned their daughters to lower their eyes, to speak softly, to never challenge the order of things, and those who rebelled, even quietly, were branded dangerous. Yet beneath this suffocating obedience, fear ruled everything. Women learned early that one mistake, a misinterpreted word, a rumor, a jealous rival, could destroy their lives. They walked a knife's edge between respectability and ruin. It's easy, centuries later, to view this as distant history, but the documents, court records, and personal testimonies reveal something colder. A system so meticulous, so deliberate, it turned oppression into routine. And as you'll see next, legal subjugation was only the surface layer. Beneath it existed a darker, more horrifying economy, one that transformed women into currency, traded, branded, and broken in plain sight. If the laws of the Ottoman Empire chained women, its slave markets annihilated them. Here humanity had a price, and beauty determined your value. Across the empire, from Cairo to Constantinople, thousands of girls were bought, sold, and transported every year. Some were captured in raids. Others were handed over by their own families, desperate to escape starvation. For many, the journey began not with violence, but with a father's trembling signature, selling his daughter to survive another winter. The Swiss traveller Johann Ludwig Burckhardt documented one such port. Each year, he wrote, 5,000 Ethiopian women passed through, most destined for sexual slavery and prostitution. But they weren't alone. Circassian and Georgian girls, prized for their light skin and features, were among the most sought-after merchandise. It was a system so vast and organized it resembled industry. Ottoman law allowed men unlimited sexual access to their female slaves. What we'd call rape was, under their code, a property right. Slave dealers even created legal loopholes to turn brothels into temporary ownership exchanges, selling women for a few nights, then reclaiming them for resale. A revolving door of human suffering, signed and stamped by religious authority. The horror wasn't hidden, it was celebrated. In some regions, parents believed sending their daughters into slavery might grant them wealth or favor at court. Imagine a world so warped that bondage was seen as opportunity. For the empire, this wasn't moral failure, it was economic genius. Women became assets in ledgers, traded like silks or spices. Each transaction documented, each life reduced to ink on parchment. The scale defies comprehension. Historians estimate that across 6 centuries, hundreds of thousands, or perhaps millions, of women vanished into this machinery. Raiding parties swept through villages, capturing the young and the beautiful. Entire regions were emptied, their people harvested like crops, and at the heart of it all stood one glittering symbol of Ottoman power, a place the world still romanticizes, the imperial harem. But behind its jeweled walls lay not luxury or love, only hierarchy, fear, and the calculated breaking of the human soul. To the outside world, the imperial harem shimmered like paradise, golden domes, silken chambers, and women draped in jewels. But behind those marble walls was not a palace of pleasure. It was a prison of souls. The harem was the beating heart of Ottoman power, and the empire's darkest secret. Hundreds of women lived within its walls, most of them slaves taken from conquered lands. Some were as young as 12. They arrived terrified, stripped of their names, their families, their languages. The first lesson they learned was obedience. The second was silence. The hierarchy was brutal. At the top stood the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, ruling with an iron will. Below her were concubines ranked by their ability to bear sons. A woman's survival depended on one thing: producing a male heir. Those who failed were exiled to the old palace, a silent graveyard for forgotten women. This was not luxury. It was competition, engineered cruelty designed to break spirits. New arrivals endured humiliation and violence at the hands of older concubines. Defiance was crushed instantly. Girls accused of witchcraft could be sewn into sacks and thrown into the Bosphorus. Others were beaten or starved for showing the slightest hint of disobedience. Even the eunuchs, themselves victims of mutilation, served as enforcers, guarding doors and punishing those who dreamed of escape. Within those walls, the oppressed became tools of oppression, creating a cycle of control that fed on fear. To outsiders, the harem appeared as a symbol of beauty and refinement. But for those trapped inside, it was a labyrinth of survival, a place where every smile could hide betrayal and every gesture could mean death. The Sultan's word was absolute. A single whim could condemn or elevate a woman overnight, and when his interest faded, she vanished from history, replaced by another captive, another broken dream. The records that survive paint a chilling picture. The Ottoman court transformed the human body into a battlefield, where power was measured not in armies or gold, but in the suffering of women made invisible. What happened inside the Sultan's harem wasn't an exception, it was the blueprint. Outside the palace, across the empire's cities and provinces, the same system of domination spread like an invisible network. Every major Ottoman city had its own slave market, divided into sections, one for laborers, another for soldiers, and one reserved exclusively for women and girls. Here human lives were weighed and priced like grain. Records show contracts written with bureaucratic precision: height, complexion, age, virginity, even obedience level. It was industrialized cruelty, maintained not in secrecy but in full daylight. Legal codes defined everything. They outlined how to claim ownership of a woman, how to breed her children, and how to punish her if she resisted. There were even regulations for what to do if a female slave died during correction. The words are chilling. Correction, not torture. Language itself was weaponized to make horror sound administrative. Archaeological excavations at Ottoman government complexes have revealed rooms with strange features. Stone floors sloped for drainage, iron rings embedded into walls. These weren't prisons for criminals. They were processing rooms for human beings, places where women were inspected, branded and catalogued before being sold or assigned to households. This wasn't chaos. It was infrastructure. The empire didn't merely tolerate brutality. It engineered it. Administrators understood something terrifying. Fear could conquer faster than armies. When word spread of what happened to captured women, entire villages surrendered without a fight. Parents hid their daughters. Some even took their lives rather than face capture. Terror became policy, a psychological weapon far more efficient than gunpowder. Even the empire's shipping routes adapted to the trade. Specialized vessels carried captives across the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, equipped with ventilation holes and water storage to keep cargo alive just long enough to reach port. These were not ships of commerce or conquest. They were floating prisons built for silence, and yet the world looked away. While Europe admired Ottoman architecture and art, few spoke of the hidden chambers beneath that splendor, the foundations built on broken bodies, because in this empire, control wasn't just maintained by soldiers and laws, it was maintained by fear, systematic, efficient, and endlessly profitable. If you were lucky enough to survive capture, transport, and sale, your nightmare was only beginning. Because in the Ottoman world, slavery wasn't just an occupation, it was inheritance. A child born to an enslaved woman was automatically property of her master. No exceptions, no hope. The system was self-sustaining. Generation after generation of women and children trapped in cycles of ownership. And this wasn't chaos or cruelty born of war. It was policy. The empire's legal codes explicitly detailed how these children were to be handled, trained, and, when old enough, sold again. Ottoman physicians even wrote medical guides on maintaining the health of pregnant slaves, describing them with the same detachment used for livestock. One text advised, "Keep her strong enough to deliver but not idle enough to grow disobedient." Pregnancy didn't spare anyone. Women worked until the moment of birth, then returned to labor within days. Their newborns were torn away, sorted by value. Boys were often sold before the age of 10 to prevent emotional attachment that might reduce obedience. Girls stayed behind, raised to serve in the same households that enslaved their mothers. Love was forbidden because it threatened efficiency. Those who resisted, who struck back, tried to flee or even spoke defiance, faced punishments designed to terrify everyone who witnessed them. Legal records describe female slaves being buried alive in narrow stone-lined pits outside city walls. The dimensions were exact: 6 feet deep, 3 feet wide. Too shallow to stand, too tight to lie down. They died slowly, a message carved into the earth. This was not barbarism in chaos, it was barbarism by design. A calculated system where cruelty became routine, paperwork replaced conscience, and human suffering was converted into economic output. The numbers are staggering: hundreds of thousands of women across 6 centuries. Each one a story erased, a name never written, a life turned into someone's profit margin. And when you look closer, the empire's wealth, its art, its power, its palaces, begins to shimmer with something else entirely, the reflection of the lives it consumed. When the Ottoman Empire finally fell, its palaces crumbled, its armies vanished, but the silence remained. The silence of millions of women whose names never entered the record books. Their stories were buried beneath marble floors and polished history. Chroniclers praise the empire's architecture, its poetry, its art, but rarely its victims. To question the system meant questioning civilization itself, and so generation after generation, the suffering of women disappeared beneath words like tradition, honor, and faith. But the evidence endures, carved into stone, written in ledgers, whispered through diaries smuggled out of the harem. Archaeologists have uncovered the remnants of processing rooms in government complexes, drainage channels cut into floors, iron rings embedded in walls. These weren't myths. They were infrastructure, proof that cruelty wasn't random. It was planned, documented, and maintained. And the purpose of it all wasn't just domination, it was deterrence. The empire understood that terrorizing women meant controlling men. When fathers and brothers saw what happened to the captured, resistance collapsed. Fear became a weapon sharper than any blade. The Ottoman system of female oppression lasted more than 6 centuries, longer than most modern nations have existed. It didn't collapse because of morality or reform. It ended because the empire itself did. The machinery stopped not from guilt, but from exhaustion. And yet its legacy lingers, not only in history books, but in the quiet ways societies still excuse inequality. The same logic, that control is protection, that silence is virtue, echoes across time. Dressed in new words but carrying the same chains. What happened to women in the Ottoman world isn't just a story about the past. It's a mirror, showing how easily power justifies cruelty, how quickly civilization can normalize the unthinkable. For 600 years, half of a population was trained to disappear, and the world applauded their captors' palaces. So, when we look at history's golden empires, we should ask, whose bones built the marble? Whose silence made the music sound so pure? Because behind every empire's greatness, there's always someone's grave. History remembers the conquerors, not the conquered. It paints the Ottoman Empire in golden glory. Domes, palaces, armies, art. But beneath that brilliance was a truth the world refused to see. Millions of women whose lives built that empire, whose pain became its foundation. They were mothers who never held their children. Daughters sold before they could dream. Wives traded, widows tried, slaves forgotten. Each one a fragment of a story too heavy for history to carry, so it simply didn't. But silence is also a weapon, and every time we ignore what was done, we hand that weapon to the next generation of oppressors. Because what happened in 16th century Istanbul didn't vanish with the empire. It lives on in every society that still tells women how much they're worth, what they can wear, where they can go, and who they should obey. That's why stories like this matter. Not to shock, but to remember. To remind us that civilization is not measured by its architecture or armies, but by how it treats its most vulnerable. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, sad, or simply aware, don't let it fade when the video ends. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share this story, because someone needs to hear it. And subscribe, because next week, we're uncovering another hidden chapter of history, one that reveals how power, faith, and fear shaped the destinies of millions who never got to speak for themselves. The empire may be gone, but the echoes of its silence still haunt the world, and maybe by remembering them, we can finally break it.